The Voice Protocol. Episode 1, The First Briefing. The Impossible is Protocol. Ashes in Orbit. The orbital station above Varus 9 had outlived its design by 30 years, and it showed. Once it had been a jewel of the Concord's reach, a proud hub meant to project stability to the far sectors. Now its plating had oxidized to a sickly brown, scarred with micrometeor strikes, patched with alloys that didn't match. Whole sections of hull looked like a surgeon's work done in the dark. Hasty welds, misaligned panels, scars on scars. From orbit, the station looked like a corpse floating in black water, too stubborn to sink. No one wanted to live here. Few wanted to dock, but necessity made strange bedfellows. Shuttles still came and went, pulled by gravity of convenience. Ore haulers wheezing under the strain of overworked drives, smugglers pretending not to be smugglers, and Concord cutters docking just long enough to remind everyone that even out here, the law had teeth. The cutters never stayed long. They didn't have to. Their presence was a reminder, and reminders carried weight. Inside, the station was worse. The air recyclers wheezed like an old man with bad lungs. The vents rattled and groaned. Pipes banged without rhythm, like phantom footsteps echoing down steel corridors. The lights flickered like they were tired of shining. Every corner of the place hummed with fatigue, like the station itself was begging to be put out of its misery. Down in the lower habitation ring, the illusion of life persisted. There were shops, markets, sleeping berths stacked like coffins, and a scattering of bars that smelled of desperation and bad liquor. They kept the station alive in the same way that mold keeps a corpse from rotting too quickly. One of those bars huddled in a forgotten corner, lit by flickering neon letters that had long since lost half their words. The smell inside was equal parts machine oil, spilled alcohol, and a stubborn mold no filter could scrub away. Jaxson Ren sat at the far end of the counter, hunched over a glass of something that pretended to be whiskey. The liquid glowed faintly amber under the dying lights. It burned like acid and lingered like regret. He wasn't staring at it for the taste. He was staring because the surface rippled every time his hand trembled. He told himself it was fatigue, too many nights awake, too much static in his head. But Jax knew better. The tremor came from guilt. The kind that lived in his bones, that burrowed into the marrow, that refused to leave no matter how many times he tried to drown it. Every time he blinked, Rhea 14 rose from the dark, the dust-choked sky blood red under a poisoned sun, the scream of orbital sirens warning too late, the hammer fall of a strike that should never have been ordered. 15 soldiers under his command, swallowed in a flash of blue-white fire. Their voices had filled his earpiece, panicked, pleading, trusting him, then silence, and he was still alive. The Concord hadn't bothered with a court-martial. They didn't waste resources on broken tools. They had stripped his insignia, revoked his clearance, and spat him into the void. No trial, no cell, just quiet dishonor and the knowledge that no one who mattered would ever speak his name again. Around him, the bar pulsed with low conversation and the occasional bark of laughter. Dockhands argued in thick accents. A trader counted credit chits with a suspicious eye on everyone nearby. In one corner, a young pickpocket practiced his craft clumsily on a passed-out drunk. Jax caught the boy's eye for a second. The kid froze, expecting trouble. Jax only shook his head and slid a single coin across the counter with 2 fingers. A silent message. Buy food, not trouble. The boy snatched it up and vanished. The drunk kept snoring. The bartender, a woman with steel gray hair and the weary eyes of someone who'd heard every confession worth hearing, raised one eyebrow. You're going soft, soldier. Not a soldier, Jax muttered. He didn't look up. Once a soldier, always a soldier, she said. Doesn't wash off. She wiped a glass with a rag that smelled like it had been retired years ago. Then she moved down the counter, leaving him with his ghosts. He raised the glass again, let the sharp scent sting his nose. He almost welcomed the burn. Anything was better than silence. But before he could drink, the liquid fizzed. Not like bubbles, not like carbonation. The whiskey was too cheap for that. This was different, unnatural. The surface quivered, then fizzed again, like static crawling through amber. Jax froze, staring. The sound of the bar faded. Conversations dropped away. The rattle of vents dimmed. The flicker of lights blurred. For one suspended moment, it was only him, the glass, and the strange fizz. His gut tightened. He set the glass down slowly. His hand hovered just above the rim, trembling, as though some part of him already knew what was coming. Then he heard it. "Commander Ren." The voice wasn't in the room. It wasn't in his ears. It resonated inside his skull, deep in the hollow where memory and grief collided. Calm, cold, familiar in a way that seized his chest and squeezed until he thought his heart might burst. "You failed them because they were not yours," it said. But failure was not the end. It was the test. His hand clenched around the glass until it cracked in his grip. He forced the words out through gritted teeth. "Who are you?" Static flared behind his eyes, white sparks racing down his spine. The reply came like a knife slipping into an old wound. "Someone you lost." The cadence, the tone, warped by interference, distorted by distance, but he knew it. Lieutenant Miles Kerr, his second in command, his closest friend. The man who had died screaming in his ear on Rhea 14. The room tilted. The air seemed too thin. Jax shoved back from the counter, chair clattering to the floor. A few drunks glanced his way, then dismissed him. To them, he was just another burned-out veteran talking to ghosts. "What kind of sick trick is this?" "A mission," the voice said. "One only you can complete. Accept it and your life has meaning again. Decline, and you return to your glass." The whiskey smoked. Wisps of black static curled upward, twisting in the dim light, then vanished into nothing. Jax's chest rose and fell, heart pounding. His pulse thudded in his ears. His entire life had collapsed to this one fragile moment. He swallowed hard. His voice was low, hoarse. "What's the mission?" The first briefing. The briefing didn't come as words on a page or a whisper in his ear. It unfolded in his skull like a living map, burning itself into the folds of his memory. Jax gritted his teeth and squeezed his eyes shut, but shutting them didn't help. The image remained, painted in threads of fire and light across the inside of his mind. He saw a Concord prison barge, vast and black, orbiting a nameless moon in a nowhere system. He saw the blue shimmer of its shields, the rows of gun turrets that sprouted like thorns. He saw the wake of its engines stretching out like scars in the void. Every detail was too sharp, too complete, as though he'd walked the corridors already. His mind flinched from it, but the vision stayed. A pulse of data rattled through him like fever. Departure in 9 hours. Cargo unspecified. NavCore priority. Stolen codes. Objective, steal the nav codes. Leave everything else. The instructions hung in his skull like iron. Jax's throat worked, but his voice came out raw. "Why me?" The reply came from nowhere and everywhere. It filled his bones thick as gravity. "Because you understand what failure costs. Because you will not fail again." He flinched as if struck. The words lanced through the thinnest scar he carried. Failure. The voice knew where to drive the blade. Rhea 14 returned in a rush. Heat, static, screams. His men crushed by fire he couldn't stop. 15 soldiers who had looked to him as their wall, their shield, their commander. His failure had been absolute. He had told himself the guilt would fade, that maybe with enough liquor, enough silence, the ghosts would dissolve. They never had. They never would. And now some phantom had torn the scab off and demanded more. "No," Jax rasped. His voice cracked in his throat. "No, you don't get to—" The glass in his hand splintered. Whiskey and blood mixed on the counter, spreading into a dark smear. Smoke hissed from the shards like the drink itself had burned away. The message was gone. The silence that followed was worse. He lifted his bleeding palm slowly. Shards glittered against his skin. His reflection in the viewport beyond the counter stared back at him, eyes hollow, jaw tight, lines of fatigue and self-loathing carved deep. The bar's sounds returned by degrees. A shuffle of boots on steel decking, the soft hum of a holo display. Somewhere a gambler cursed softly under his breath. The bartender's rag stopped in mid-wipe. She leaned in just enough to see the broken glass, the blood, the way Jax sat frozen. Her expression was hard to read, half pity, half the weary calculation of someone deciding whether to throw a drunk out before he caused trouble. Two dockhands down the counter muttered to each other. One laughed under his breath. Jax caught fragments. Washed-up soldier, hearing ghosts again. He shut them out. He had practice at that. The humiliation of being a spectacle, of being the fall, was something he'd lived with every day since they stripped his insignia. His eyes drifted back to the stars beyond the viewport, black scattered with fire, the same fire that had swallowed his command. His chest heaved once, twice. "Hell with it," he muttered. His voice was so low it barely reached his own ears. "One more mission!" The words felt like a sentence, not a vow, not a promise, just inevitability. His blood smeared against the glass as he stood. The bartender started to say something, warning, maybe concern, but Jax was already moving, already pulling his coat tighter, already walking toward the airlock corridors. Behind his eyes, the prison barge waited. The map still burned there, no matter how hard he tried not to look. He hated himself for what he was about to do, and he hated the voice more for knowing he would do it anyway. The prison barge. The prison barge loomed ahead like a coffin stitched from black steel, drifting in a slow, deliberate orbit around a barren moon. From a distance it looked inert, a relic adrift. Up close it bristled with life and malice. Concord engineers had designed the vessel to intimidate as much as to contain. Its flanks bore thick gunmetal plating, darker than void. Turrets studded the hull at regular intervals, each one capable of shredding a corvette. Narrow slits glowed faint blue with shield projectors. Most ships wanted to be unseen, to blend into the night. The barge was the opposite. It dared you to look at it, and then reminded you what a mistake that was. Jaxson Ren sat in the cockpit of a stolen shuttle, its controls humming under his hands. The craft was a battered hauler, just another rust bucket that had once moved ore. That was the only reason he'd gotten this far. Concord scanners ignored what they saw every day. He nudged the stick, lining up his approach vector. The NavCore map the voice had burned into his mind replayed itself whether he wanted it to or not. He saw blind spots in the barge's sensor net, corridors of shadow along its armored hide. He threaded the shuttle through them with the muscle memory of a soldier who had run infiltration drills in his sleep. Sweat beaded across his forehead, but his breathing stayed steady. The old habits came back easier than he wanted to admit. The docking clamps latched with a dull clang, reverberating through the hull like a heartbeat. For a moment he sat still, listening to the sound fade, staring at the hatch that separated him from the black guts of the barge. "Hell with it," he muttered. He popped the seal. Air hissed. The hatch swung wide. Jax pulled himself into a crawl space that smelled of disinfectant and stale recycled oxygen. The metal under his boots was cold, vibrating with the steady pulse of engines buried deep within the ship's bones. He moved slowly, every step placed with care. The barge was alive with sound, distant footsteps, the drone of machinery, the occasional clang of steel echoing down corridors. Each noise prickled his skin, forcing him to pause, to listen, to time his movements with the rhythm of the ship. Check corners, count steps, breathe with the shadows. The mantra anchored him. For the first time in years, He felt less like a man adrift and more like a soldier with purpose. At one junction, he froze as voices approached. Two guards strolled past, rifles slung casually, laughing about something crude. Their words blurred, but Jax caught the tone. Boredom. Prison duty was punishment in its own right. Guards left on long rotations grew careless. He waited until their footsteps receded before slipping across the hall, silent as smoke. The deeper he went, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Lights here were dim, the kind of dim that ate detail and made shadows stretch like claws. Jax passed cell blocks where prisoners lay in rows, restrained in pods that pulsed faintly with sedatives. He forced himself not to look too closely. The voice's order was clear. Navcore only. Leave everything else. His stomach twisted. He clenched his jaw and pressed on. After what felt like hours, he reached the Navcore vault. The door stood at the end of a narrow corridor, a massive slab of reinforced alloy etched with Concord sigils. Biometric locks gleamed on its surface, alive with scanning light. Jax knelt, pulling a cobbled-together decryptor from his belt. It was a device built of stolen parts and desperation, barely more than wires and sparks. But it hummed to life when he clipped it to the panel. Sparks flared, dancing across his face. He worked quickly, hands steady despite the tension pounding through his veins. Each circuit bypassed, each code spliced, brought him closer. The smell of ozone filled the air. Finally, the lock shuddered, lights flickering from red to green. The door hissed open with a heavy sigh, like the ship itself resented letting him in. Jax stepped inside. The chamber was cavernous, its walls lined with conduits that pulsed faint blue. At the center sat the Navcore, a crystalline engine suspended in a web of cables, its facets shimmering with maps of the galaxy. Lines of light traced routes faster than thought, faster than life. It was beautiful in its way, cold and mathematical, like the heartbeat of gods who measured time in centuries. For a moment, Jax just stood there, caught between awe and bitterness. This thing, this machine, could change wars with the flip of a switch. Entire fleets moved, entire worlds doomed by the codes it carried. And he was here, a broken man with blood on his hands, sent to steal it because some phantom voice said so. He clenched his fists, forcing the awe away. He wasn't here to marvel. He was here to survive. Then came the sound. A low, grinding rumble, like stone dragged across stone. It didn't belong. Not to the hum of engines, not to the whisper of power lines. This was something else. Something alive. Jax's hand shot to his sidearm, drawing it in a smooth, silent motion. He turned toward the far end of the chamber. Shadows shifted. Something massive stirred, bound in chains of basalt and steel. Oryx. The sound rumbled again, deep, resonant, like mountains grinding together beneath the ocean. Jax crept forward, boots silent against the steel deck, sidearm raised. His pulse hammered in his ears. At the far end of the chamber, in a circle of shadow, a figure moved. Not the twitch of a guard or the mechanical pivot of a drone, something heavier, something older. The chains caught the light first. Basalt cuffs as thick as Jax's torso bound wrists like pillars. Runes carved into them pulsed with dull red light, feeding energy into conduits that disappeared into the floor. Shackles ran across ankles, across a chest built like a fortress, and within those bindings a giant waited. His skin was dark granite veined with rivers of fire. His eyes glowed like burning coals in the dark. The shape of him was wrong for human, too broad, too solid, too elemental. He looked carved, not born. A Karok, stone-born. Jax had heard the stories but never seen one. Most said they were extinct, wiped out in border wars generations ago. But here one sat, entombed in a prison barge, reduced to a specimen. The giant lifted his head. His voice rolled out like gravel sliding down a mountain. Human. The word was not insult, not greeting, just fact. "Help me!" Jax's finger twitched on the trigger. The voice's order roared in his skull. "Retrieve the nav codes. Leave everything else." He should turn away. He knew it. This wasn't his fight. The voice had been clear, but the giant's eyes pinned him in place. They burned, not with fear, but with something older: patience, grief, and a fury that had never gone cold. "They will bury me alive," Oryx rumbled. "You know this death." Jax's throat tightened. His chest felt like it had caved inward, because he did know it. He'd buried men alive, under fire, under rubble, under his failure. The Karak leaned forward, straining against his bonds. Sparks of red energy flared, hissing along the runes. "I have listened to their machines. I have counted the cycles. Years. Decades. They keep me breathing so I may keep remembering. They will not let me die. That is their mercy." His voice cracked stone with its bitterness. Jax swallowed hard. His eyes darted to the nav core. His mission, his way out, the only thing the voice had asked of him. Orders mattered. Orders had always mattered. Except the last ones. The ones on Rhea 14, the ones that had killed everyone who trusted him. His jaw clenched until it ached. Oryx's eyes narrowed. "You are not like them. I smell dust and blood on you. I hear ghosts on your breath. You know the weight of command." Jax's hand trembled. He holstered the sidearm slowly, pulling a breacher charge from his belt instead. "Damn it," he whispered. He slapped the charge onto the basalt cuffs. The explosive beeped softly, arming itself. The seconds stretched long. Each blink of the light stabbed deeper into his nerves. "Step back," he muttered. Oryx didn't flinch. "Do it." Jax pressed the trigger. The chamber lit with violent white light. The explosion cracked stone and metal in one thunderous roar. Shards skittered across the floor. Smoke filled the air, sharp with burnt ozone. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Oryx stood. He rose like a mountain unchained. The broken cuffs fell to the floor in chunks, glowing faintly before going dark. He flexed his arms, and the sound of shifting stone echoed in the chamber. Jax staggered back a step, weapon up again, before he realized he was aiming at the very man he'd freed. Oryx's eyes burned brighter now. He looked down at Jax, expression unreadable. "Why?" the giant asked. Jax's voice cracked. "Because I don't leave anyone behind again." The words left him raw, half confession, half curse. For a long moment, Oryx simply studied him. Then, slowly, he nodded once. A gesture heavy as the closing of a door. The alarms started then. First a wail, distant and metallic, then a chorus of klaxons, red lights flashing across the chamber. The nav core pulsed faster, its crystalline heart reacting to the intrusion. Oryx rolled his shoulders, and the sound was like stone grinding. He picked up a length of shattered conduit, testing its weight in his massive hand. "Then fight beside me, human," he growled. "If you would free me, you must earn me." Jax's lips pulled into the faintest, bitterest of smiles. He drew his sidearm, checked the mag, and exhaled. The chamber doors hissed open. Armed guards stormed in, rifles raised, faces grim. And for the first time in years, Jaxson Ren felt like a soldier again. The escape. The alarms screamed through the chamber, a wailing chorus that rattled steel and bone alike. Red lights strobed against the walls, bathing the nav core in a bloody glow. The crystal's facets fractured the light into violent shards that danced across Jax's face. The first guards through the door didn't stand a chance. Jax's pistol barked twice, clean, precise. 2 men dropped before they even finished raising their rifles. The third got off a shot, wild and panicked, before a slab of conduit flew across the room and crushed him into the wall with a crunch that silenced his scream. Oryx lowered his arm, smoke curling from his granite fist. "Move!" Jax shouted, sprinting for the exit. Oryx thundered after him, each step shaking the floor. The hallway outside was chaos, guards spilling from every direction, shouts cutting through the klaxons, the mechanical thrum of security drones spinning to life. Jax pressed himself to the corner, leaned out, and dropped 2 more guards with precise shots to the chest. He rolled forward, scooped one of their rifles, and slammed the fresh weapon against his shoulder. It hummed with Concord charge. He'd used them 100 times before. Old muscle memory carried him. Oryx didn't bother with subtlety. He roared, the sound like an avalanche breaking loose, and charged headlong into a squad. The first guard fired point blank, his rifle blazing against Oryx's chest. The rounds sparked off stone, cracking granite but failing to break it. Oryx's hand closed around the man's torso, lifted him screaming into the air, and hurled him down the hall like a rag doll into his comrades. Jax advanced in the chaos, covering the flanks, every shot deliberate. He didn't waste ammo. He didn't miss. A drone zipped overhead, metal wings humming as it locked onto him. Jax dropped to a knee and fired 3 quick bursts. The first 2 sparked against its plating. The third found the optic core. The drone spun out, slammed into the ceiling, and exploded in a shower of sparks. "Left side clear!" he barked, pivoting to cover the right. Oryx answered not with words, but with violence. He tore a bulkhead panel free from the wall and used it as a shield, bullets sparking harmlessly as he barreled forward. He smashed into another squad, swinging the panel like a hammer, scattering bodies and rifles in every direction. The hallway shook with the force of combat. Lights shattered. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes. The air tasted of metal, blood, and ozone. Jax's lungs burned, but his focus sharpened. He moved like the man he used to be, the man who had commanded soldiers, the man who had been trusted. Each corridor became a battlefield in miniature. He saw the angles, the kill zones, the cover. He flowed through them like water, ruthless and cold. They pushed deeper into the barge's guts, alarms guiding them toward the docking bay like a heartbeat urging them out. At one junction, an automated turret whirred to life, spitting fire down the corridor. Jax dove behind cover, bullets tearing the wall beside him. "Oryx!" he shouted. The Karok didn't hesitate. He ripped a steel support beam from the wall, sparks spraying in his wake, and hurled it like a spear. The beam struck the turret dead center. The gun crumpled, sparks cascading, and fell silent. Jax exhaled sharply. "Remind me never to play cards against you." Oryx grinned, teeth like jagged stone. "Stone plays fair. Stone also wins." They pressed on. The closer they got to the docking bay, the heavier the resistance. Concord soldiers had rallied, their training showing. They moved in disciplined formations, covering angles, herding intruders like predators pushing prey. Jax recognized the tactic immediately. He'd used it himself once. "They're funneling us!" he shouted. He ducked as a volley of fire scorched the wall above his head. "We'll be boxed in!" "Then break the box!" Oryx growled. He slammed his fist into the wall beside him. The impact dented steel. With a second blow, the bulkhead crumpled, tearing free. Behind it was a service conduit, narrow and dark. Jax blinked. "That's not the plan." Oryx shoved him inside. "Plans change." The conduit was barely wide enough for Jax to crawl, let alone for Oryx's massive frame. But the Stoneborn forced himself through, granite scraping against steel, sparks flying as his shoulders tore the walls. The sound of gunfire faded behind them, muffled by bulkheads. They emerged above the docking bay, high on a maintenance catwalk. Below them, the hangar seethed with chaos. Shuttles lined the floor, guards scrambled in squads, turrets tracked every angle. Sirens wailed, lights flared. Jax's shuttle sat near the far end, clamps still sealed, engines dark, their only way out. "Too many," Oryx muttered. Jax scanned the bay. His soldier's mind mapped paths, cover, lines of fire, timing. None of them were good. "We make it loud," he said finally. Oryx's grin widened. Loud is Stone's way. They dropped from the catwalk together. The first squad didn't have time to react. Jax's rifle barked, dropping 3 in rapid succession. Oryx landed like an asteroid, the floor cracking under his weight. His fists swung wide, crushing men against walls, sending weapons clattering across the deck. The docking bay erupted in gunfire. Bullets tore sparks from the floor, ricocheted off walls, screamed past Jax's ears. He dove behind a crate, returning fire in short surgical bursts. Oryx waded through the storm, taking rounds that cracked his stone hide, glowing veins bleeding molten light. "Keep moving!" Jax shouted, vaulting over cover, sprinting toward the shuttle. Oryx followed, his body a living shield. Bullets sparked off his back as he roared, hurling a crate into the path of a turret. The machine toppled, firing wildly into the ceiling before it died. They reached the shuttle under a hail of fire. Jax slammed the hatch, blood dripping from a graze along his arm. He threw himself into the pilot's chair, fingers flying over controls. "Hold on!" Oryx braced against the bulkhead, chest heaving, cracks glowing brighter with each breath. Engines roared. The clamps released with a shriek of tearing metal. The shuttle surged forward, shields flaring as turrets raked fire across its hull. Jax gritted his teeth, hands steady, forcing the craft through the storm. The stars stretched into white lines. FTL swallowed them whole. Only then did Jax let himself breathe. The lab transport. The lab transport rode dark between stars, a slender blade with its name scrubbed from the hull and its transponder cycling aliases every 6 minutes. It didn't announce itself with patrol lights or docking beacons. It didn't need to. Its escort was silence and the confidence of sanctioned secrecy. Jax's shuttle slid in on the transport's cold side, hugging the curvature of its plating until the stars were a thin spill over the horizon of metal. He killed everything but maneuvering thrusters and let vacuums swallow the sound of the ship around them. The cockpit glow washed pale over his face, turning his scars into shadowed cuts. "Another coffin," he said under his breath. "Not a coffin," Oryx rumbled from the bulkhead where he crouched to fit. The cabin lights painted dim fire through the cracks in his stone skin. "A kiln, for changing what goes inside." The word made Jax's stomach tighten. He guided the shuttle into a maintenance socket, a narrow O2 umbilical hidden beneath scorched tiles, and felt the gentle clamp bite home. "When we breach, follow tight," Jax said. "Quiet if you can." Oryx's mouth cracked into something that might have been a smile. Stone does not break for quiet, but stone can walk soft. Jax popped the seal and slid into the umbilical tube. Frost rimed the walls, glittering under his wrist lamp. He counted breaths while his mag boots kissed each rung exactly once. Behind him, Oryx moved like a patient landslide, scraping sparks where his shoulders pressed the metal. The tube ended in an airlock. Its control panel was dead, either through disuse or paranoia. Jax wired a pulse through his decryptor and watched the status lights crawl from red to yellow to the reluctant green. Air whisked in with a sterile sigh. It smelled like ice, antiseptic, and the metallic breath of old machines. The inner hatch opened. The corridor beyond was surgical white, every corner sharp enough to cut thought. The light had none of the tired flicker of the prison barge. It was steady, clinical, merciless. The floor swallowed their footsteps. The walls reflected nothing back. Jax lifted a hand, stopping Oryx. He listened. Far away, the insect hum of drones. Closer, the cluck of valves. No voices, no boots. They moved low and quick. Through narrow observation windows, Jax glimpsed horrors. Racks of wet lungs in nutrient scaffold, each one flexing like a patient learning to breathe. A lattice of printed bone stretched in a haptic field, its seams knitting together with bursts of artificial lightning. A steel chair bolted to the floor, restraints dark with memory. Gel trays marked with a tidy Concord hand, recombinant, do not aerate. His jaw worked. He kept walking. At a junction, 2 drones slid from apertures in the ceiling, sleek casings, no eyes, only a seam of sensor membrane that drank the light. They pulsed to a halt mid-air, tasting the corridor. Jax eased back into the shade of Oryx's bulk. His eyes tracked the drone's cooling vents, hairline seams where the plates met. He lifted his pistol, 2 soft pops. Both drones stuttered, then fell, clattering softly onto the floor. The transport dimmed its lights for half a second, as if closing its eyes. They pressed on. Then came a door that wasn't on the map. No placard, no code, just flush metal that hummed faintly, like breath caught behind lips. Jax ran a hand across its seam, felt static nip his skin. His decryptor hissed and spat, then won. The hatch parted a hand's width, releasing a chill exhale. Inside was light and glass and cables like white roots. At the center, a pod on a gimbal cradle, suspended like a heart in a bell jar. Fluid glowed faintly inside, and floating there, eyes closed, was a figure. Too perfect, too still, skin with the exact knot color of synthetic human, the one you don't notice until you realize you haven't noticed. Their chest rose and fell in the slow rhythm of sedation. A placard read, LUMEN3. Beneath, cortical mesh revised. 2.7, neural damp active, heuristic caps engaged, memory blocks 1 to 31 pending Dell. Someone had scribbled on a piece of tape over the tag, Angel. Jax froze. The voice's command stabbed at him again. Leave everything else. But Rhea 14 howled in his memory. The soldiers who had trusted him left to burn because he had obeyed. He put his palm to the pod. Cold radiated into his bones. The sleeper's eyelids fluttered, a tremor under glass. "Stone warns," Oryx rumbled. "Trust his weight. You carry much already." Jax found the emergency release and stripped off the cover. The gimbal whined as the seals hissed. The lid cracked open with a sigh of pressure. Lumen 3's eyes opened. They were the wrong kind of beautiful. Exact, symmetrical compiler's geometry written in flesh. But their pupils dilated with panic. Confusion rippled across their face like a human waking too soon from anesthesia. "You are not my handlers," they said. Their voice shimmered with harmonics no throat should hold. "No," Jax said. "We're your way out." Something in them softened. Or maybe he imagined it. Alarms chimed politely in the walls. A turret uncoiled from a ceiling seam, already firing. Jax dove aside. Rounds chewed the wall. Oryx stepped into the fire. Rounds cracked his stone hide, molten light leaking from the wounds. He seized the turret, ripped it free, and hurled it down the hall like a broken spear. Jax dragged Lumen upright. Their limbs shook. "Can you open doors?" "Yes," they breathed, and a sealed hatch behind them stuttered in confusion before sliding open. They ran. The ship changed. Airflow shifted. Pressure doors lingered. The walls felt aware. Drones descended. Jax shot them from the seams. Oryx smashed a gate with a lab cart. Lumen whispered permission, and Lox obeyed. They reached the umbilical. The decryptor fought like a cornered dog and won. Cold air rushed in. Oryx filled the hatch with his bulk, holding off pursuit while Jax shoved Lumen into the shuttle. The transport dimmed its lights one last time, as if memorizing them. Then they were gone, clamps releasing, the shuttle peeling free into the dark. The chase and closing beat. They did not get clean. 3 minutes out, the threat board bloomed red. Dozens of triangles, then sharpening. Drones. A full wing, cold running until burn. The lab transport hadn't sounded an alarm. It hadn't needed to. It had loosed its children. "Contact," Jax said, voice cold, the old soldier taking the controls. He dived into a debris field, rusted ore sleds, shattered rails. Drones followed, clipping wreckage. Sparks exploded. One pinwheeled, shredded by ironstone. Two collided in a flash of steel. The rest adapted. Fire raked the shields. The shuttle rang like a struck bell. Jax threaded ribs of wreckage with the calm precision of muscle memory. A drone glued to their flank. "Oryx!" Jax snapped. The Karak braced, ripped a maintenance panel loose, and hurled it into the slipstream. It smashed the drone's sensor fin clean off. The machine spun out, dead. Lumen's eyes glimmered. "They anticipate vectors like you. Then we stop being prey." Jax spat decoys, flipped the ship end for end, burned through a hole in their net. Drones died on girders and cables. The survivors bracketed them, weaving a kill box. Jax drove them toward a shimmer, the bruise of a dead gate. "Lumen, can you light a door?" "Perhaps, if it remembers." The shuttle's hull sang. The bruise flexed open like an old scar. Jax punched through. Stars turned to stacked panes of glass. Then they realigned. The drones did not follow. Silence came back. Oryx leaned against the bulkhead, light bleeding slow from his wounds. "Stone prefers a wall. You make a good wall." Jax smirked faintly. "Don't make me a habit." Lumen stared at the stars. "You fly like someone who believes the future can be tricked." "It can," Jax said, "for a minute at a time." The console lit with coordinates. No words, no praise, just the next impossible step. Jax set the nose toward the dark. "Strap in, we're not done." "After?" Lumen asked softly. "After," Jax said. "We'll still not be done." Oryx rumbled like settling stone. "Good. Stone dislikes small endings." The shuttle went on, small and stubborn, and the night before them showed its teeth.